1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, we'd like to welcome everyone into another episode of Talkin G-MAC. I'm your host, Katie Gilhooly, and I'm so excited to introduce this week's guest. Not only are we celebrating National Girls and Women's in Sports Day today, but we are also celebrating our 20th episode. So I think it's a very fitting time to have somebody like this on, and I'm pleased to welcome Christina Paone from Walsh University to the show today. She is, and the reason we're having her on is because I feel like she's dabbled in so many things during her time, not only at Walsh, but just in her career athletically. She's working through the interim AD role there now. So we're super excited to have Christina on, and thanks so much for taking some time today, Christina.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be on the podcast. I've watched the whole journey, so I'm honored to be a guest, especially this week as we honor women in sports.
Yeah, well, we appreciate your viewership and you guys listening. Well, I kind of want to get right into it as we talked kind of about, what it's like to be a woman in sports and what it's like. You obviously just recently were named interim athletic director, and you're the men's and women's golf coach there. You've dabbled as the SWA at times, and also in the sports information side. So a lot of moving parts there at Walsh, and a lot of things that you've kind of been able to put your hands in and get some experience, and then also mentor some other people. So let's take it all the way back to the beginning. How did you get involved in athletics? And what's kind of your story as far as career-wise when you think about your journey from to where you are today in college athletics?
We're going to go way back because it's been a while. Honestly, I never thought my path would lead me to where I am today. So when I graduated Walsh in 2006, I got married and started a family. So being in this space was never a dream of mine. It just kind of, fell into my lap. I actually worked in radio for like 10 years. So this is very fitting, this conversation. So that was just something that I had done as we transitioned and started our family there. I obviously love the game of golf. It's been a very big part of my life. And so a local high school coach that I knew when I was a player around here reached out and asked if I had any interest in helping him. And so I thought, why not? Let's get back into the game. So I worked with them for 3 years in their program, and I loved being back around the game of golf and student athletes. And then fast forward 3 years later, the women's job opened up here at Walsh. So I was actually a part of the first women's golf program at Walsh. And so it just made perfect sense for me to take that opportunity when it came to me in 2011. So here we are 13 years later. I oversee both the men's and the women's program now. I never thought this is where I would be, but I wouldn't have changed anything about my path.
Well, I think a lot of women that end up in higher administration and in college athletics often have found themselves there because of their coaching background. I think that's pretty common, especially in a Division II space. How do you feel like your time as the men's and women's coach has kind of catapulted you into the position that you hold today there at Walsh as interim AD?
Yeah, I think it's been a slow process for me. So again, I started just as the women's coach, and I was mainly focused on that for, probably half of my coaching career here. And then opportunities came up within the department, and I knew if I wanted the chance to grow in this space, I needed to do whatever was needed. So that's kind of where my responsibilities came in the sports information world. I knew nothing about what all of that entailed, so it was a really big learning curve for me when I jumped into that role. But it's just kind of one of those things that you learn as you go. And so I took that one on full force and enjoyed every opportunity that gave me, which then in turn led to me being the SWA, which then in turn led to me being, in this interim space right now. So I think it's all about just grabbing opportunities when they come your way, even if you don't think it's going to be necessary for your path, because you really just don't know.
Well, and you mentioned SWA, and I even alluded to that. For our listeners and viewers who may not be as familiar with all of the acronyms that come with the NCAA, SWA stands for Senior Woman Administrator, and it was something that the NCAA implemented several years ago. Really as a hope to give women an opportunity to have that seat at the table. So we talk about it all the time. It's really just a designation, and it's supposed to be the highest ranking woman in your athletic department. So when we get together as a conference with our SWAs from each of our 14 schools, Christina will tell you from sitting in some of those conversations that those roles look very different. We have coaches, we have ADs, we have a plethora of different folks that and women that sit in those positions. From holding that title and kind of seeing what it's like on campus to be able to be afforded that seat, which at some universities and some colleges, you may not get that opportunity without that SWA designation. What are your thoughts on that, and what was that designation like for you, not only on the conference level, but also at Walsh and on your campus?
Yeah, I think it's really empowering to be given that, or even to be considered for that role on your campus. So our former AD, Dale Howard, came to me when our SWA at the time was transitioning out of Walsh. And at that time, I really wasn't aware of what it all entailed, but we had a really good conversation. He expressed to me how this would help in my growth here at Walsh. So again, I grabbed it and kind of ran with it. And then we have great conversation when we meet at the conference level. And it's just so awesome to be able to collaborate with other women in our industry and our conference and bounce ideas off each other, see best practices for things that work well on their campus, and just know that they're also fighting the same fights on their campus that we are, and just to know that they're there to lean on when we need the support.
Well, and I think it's unique, obviously, that the NCAA implemented this, and every NCAA institution in the entire country has an SWA. So there's always a touch point, I think, at each of the NCAA institutions for an SWA to connect with another SWA, which I think is really unique. But you really mentioned as we get together at the conference level, it's a really fun way to bounce ideas off each other, and it also gives 14 women a chance to sit in our joint council room, 3 times a year and have those conversations with our athletic directors and our faculty athletic representatives and things like that. So you have since moved away from that designation as you've taken on a bigger role. What is that like to be able to give this opportunity to another woman on Walsh's campus?
It's very exciting. So Katie Connell has assumed that role on our campus. She is our women's softball coach. She actually had that title at her former institution, so she was very aware of everything that came with it. And again, she's a fierce female, and she's awesome at what she does, and she relates really well to her teammates. And now I think this is just going to give her the opportunity to connect with people across our campus, and engage with them more on an administrative level. So I'm really excited for her.
Moving into really the highest position in athletics on a campus as an athletic director and as a female, live in what is a small company of female athletic directors, although there are many more than there were probably 10 years ago, and we have a handful in our league. When you were given this opportunity, what were some of the things that you hoped to bring to the table, and what was that you know process like, I guess, within, knowing that, as a female, you were going to be leading athletics on Walsh's campus?
It's not lost on me that it's not that common, which is kind of crazy, right? It's 2024. You feel like that would be more relevant, but to me, it's never been about me being a female. It's just me doing what I love and what I'm passionate about. And I look at that the same way as coaching the men's team. I'm coaching a group of student athletes who love what they do, who are like-minded to things that I like, and that's just what it is. So for me, it's just about continuing to lead and to lead well. We have a great group of coaches and student athletes on our campus, and I just wanted that transition to be as seamless as possible for them in our transition, in this role. So I'm grateful. Every day is awesome here on our campus and what we're doing. And I'm just really honored to be able to have this job.
You mentioned being the head coach of the men. That was a great segue because that's going to be something. It was really something that I wanted to ask you about because it's probably more uncommon to have a female coaching a men's sport than it is to have a female AD these days. And I think it was really brought to light a couple years ago when there was a D3 men's soccer coach. She was actually a female and won the national championship. So I think it got people thinking, oh my goodness, this actually does happen. When you were presented with that opportunity to take over the men's program, and for those who may be unfamiliar, we have a lot of golf coaches and tennis coaches and some of our other individual sports who assume the responsibility of both the men's and the women's program as they're a bit smaller to deal with. But you really are taking on two roles, right? You've got two different teams, and in that perspective, you have been coaching girls golf and women's golf. Now you have men, and we all know that the dynamic is obviously different. What was that like when you were presented with that opportunity? And we'll get into what it's been like in that journey here in a second.
Well, I transitioned into that role during COVID, so there were challenges there in itself. But again, when our AD at the time had reached out, it had been a conversation that him and I were already kind of having. Like, if the opportunity ever presented itself, is it something that I would be interested in? And my answer was always yes. So for me, thankfully, I had a really good relationship with most of the men on the team at the time. And so that transition, at least in my opinion, was probably more seamless than it would have been just jumping in, being brand new to the program. But outside of that, again, it's just coaching student athletes, male or female. They love the sport that I love, so we can relate on that end, and just providing them a good student athlete experience, which is something that I think that they're all looking for. So they've actually taught me more about the game of golf in the 4 years that I've been coaching them, which I think is pretty cool. They approach the game just very differently than the women do, and so I think having the opportunity to take both of those programs and making it one family was really unique. And I think that's been a really big part of the success that we've seen over the last 4 years on both sides.
Was there ever a point when you thought, oh my goodness, I might be challenged with something I wasn't challenged with when I was coaching the women? Or was there any hesitation in taking or accepting that role? It sounded like you may have thought about it before the opportunity actually was given to you, but was there any hesitation at all? Or did you really feel like this is an opportunity at Walsh for us to make this a golf family and it not have to be a men's versus women's program kind of thing, which we see all the time at every level of the NCAA. Well, the men's program gets this, and we want the women's program to get at least half of that, right? Was this an opportunity for that you felt like you could really bring, Walsh golf to a new level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think jumping into something new is always a little intimidating. So I think in that regard, I definitely was a little nervous. However, I knew that at the end of the day, what I was doing with the women's program could easily be done with the men's program. And again, I think that's very evident in all the success that the men have had over the past few years. So yeah, change and transition can be bumpy. And I think that we both were learning how to navigate me being a coach to men and then them receiving me as their female coach. So the process has been great. They've been fantastic to work with, and I'm excited about the future of their program.
When we talk about women in sports, I think sometimes it's often, I don't want to say it's given a negative connotation, but you talk to folks who are much older than you and I, and they talk about the struggles that they went through, back in the 80s and the 90s working in athletics as a female. We've obviously made great strides. We're able to see people like you, Christina, sitting in these AD roles. But as you've come up the ranks, what advice and what were you sort of told, if anything, or was it just learn as you go kind of thing, sink or swim? But what were some of the things that you were told coming up through college athletics as far as advice is concerned about being a woman in sports and maybe being the minority in a lot of those rooms?
Yeah, I think it just has to be like a never give up mentality. So when I was, starting out as a student athlete here, our sport, it was getting momentum and moving and has traction, but it is nothing like what it is now, which is great, right? You want growth in sports. So I think for me, it was just to keep my head down and to take any opportunity that I could to just propel myself into this role. I think the unique thing for me is when I look at this opportunity, it's not what I can empower the women to do, but I also have, like I take my sons, for instance, like they look at what I'm doing, coaching a men's sport as like the coolest thing ever. They're like, wow, our mom is coaching a men's team. And like for me, that resonates. Like they're recognizing that it's not common, and the fact that their mom's able to do both, I think is pretty cool. So don't let anybody ever tell you can't do something, no matter what the limitations are, because anybody can do anything.
Now that you've reached this point in your career, if there's any females out there, any little girls listening, I know you talk about your sons obviously and the impact that you can have on them, but what advice would you give to somebody out there who wants to work in athletics but isn't quite sure how to get started, or maybe they don't really know how to embrace roles maybe like you were able to do when you got to Walsh? And I think you touched on it earlier about just kind of getting your feet wet and learning as much as you can. But what advice would you give to somebody that was, wanting to end up as an AD one day?
I think when people look at athletics at first glance, it's like, oh, you can be a coach, you can be an AD, you can be an athletic trainer. There are so many jobs within athletics for male and females to be a part of that I think are just lost. And so if I can do anything as a female in this seat is to just advocate for those jobs that people might not have awareness about. Like I want to do that. So those are conversations that we have on our campus all the time, especially with the interns that we have in our department, is don't limit yourself to one career path, because you might start down one and a door might open for another, and you might not even have ever known that that was even there. So just be ready for anything that comes your way, because everything in this space is awesome.
What advice would you specifically give? And I think you gave a little bit of it earlier, but if you can expound upon it, to a female that wants to get involved in sports, and really maybe not so much. I think we'll do the coaching side and then maybe the administrative side, because I think there's different experiences that you might go through as a female coach, and then as a female administrator.
I mean, I think from the coaching perspective, again, I never thought that that was my path. It kind of fell into my lap. And I realized there was tremendous opportunity within that role, right? You're not only coaching these student athletes, you're changing their life, right? Like my relationships with my student athletes that I've had over the past 13 years long exceed their 4 years at this institution. And I think that's what's most important about what we do as coaches. Now, when I step back and I look at my time in the administration space, you have that same opportunity to impact the students on your campus, however you choose to do that. So my involvement with SAC really made me realize that you can build that one-on-one connection that our individual coaches are building within their program, but I had the opportunity to build it within our whole entire department. So I think just giving yourself those opportunities to, put yourself out there and be a part of different things on your campuses really will give you that perspective that, why you're doing what you're doing.
You mentioned your involvement with SAC, and it's something that I think I've spoken very highly of on this podcast, and talking to some student athletes who are involved in our conference SAC. I think it's one of the ways that we feel at the conference office that we're able to connect with some of our student athletes, because we're kind of so far up. We don't get to see the student athletes on a day-to-day basis like you guys do and interact with them. So it's something that's been super fulfilling for me to be able to connect with those student athletes on those campus. What was it like to be involved with SAC and to get to know student athletes outside of golf? Obviously, I know you have that relationship with your golfers, but you may not have been given that opportunity to have the relationship with the basketball team or the tennis team or the track team, to be able to connect with student athletes, and specifically some of the female student athletes. What was that like? when you again said yes to being an advisor, and getting to experience some of those student athletes and build those relationships.
I love SAC. I love it. I think it's just the greatest thing, one of the greatest things we have on this campus. So, from a coaching standpoint, you're coaching and you're walking the hallways, you're walking through your campus, and you say hi to your student athletes that you work with on a daily basis. And you might run into some other student athletes, that you're familiar with. But when you get yourself invested into SAC, that opens up a whole nother floodgate. So, for me, it's not uncommon to see a track member or a men's basketball player or a men's lacrosse player, a tennis player, and just stop and have those conversations. How's your day? How's classes? How's everything going? Where I might not have had that opportunity if I didn't put myself in that position. So I think working in, the sports information space also opened that up for me, just because I was at every event we had on campus here. I mean, you know what that's like. So you get to learn more about these student athletes. And so you can kind of build that one-on-one relationship with them. But I love the work that our SAC is doing right now. My favorite thing is just having conversation with them at our meetings, just picking their brains, seeing how creative they are. And that's not even with everything they're doing on the field or the court. It's just a great way for us to connect with them. So I'm excited. We have some pretty cool things planned on our campus for this spring through SAC. So we're pumped to get that going.
We're always excited to see what our SACs get themselves involved in over the course of their 9 or 10 months that they're all together on campus. And it's really cool to see just the creative juices flow and how a bunch of students that all love athletics but maybe play them a little bit differently get together and try and give back not only to their campus but their community as well. And so, Christina, we obviously appreciate everything that you guys have done to help facilitate that. We've talked about all of the roles, and I think you've mentioned all of the things that you've been involved in. How do you feel like the different positions that you've been able to hold and the different things that you've been able to kind of get your feet wet with, how do they, and especially on Walsh's campus, how do you feel like that helps you maybe be a better athletic director to the students and the athletes on your campus?
I think my perspective is just different, right? Like I don't want to sound cheesy and say I started from the bottom, but like I literally started from the bottom, right? And I've worked my way up really slowly, and I've taken, everything that's come my way with grace, and I've just accepted it and tried to learn from every opportunity. And so I think when I sit in this seat right now, I have the perspective as a student athlete because I went to Walsh. I have the perspective as a coach because I was a coach. I am a coach. I have the perspective and the knowledge from like the game operations, sports information side, because that was also a really big part of my life. So I think when I just look back and I can pull from every aspect that goes into just the day to day, it helps me in everything that I'm doing here right now.
Well, as we wrap up, Christina, I'm going to ask you what is probably going to be the hardest question I've asked you, because I don't know if you've gotten a chance to really reflect on this, but I think you've probably thought about it just as your time as an administrator. There will be student athletes who remember you as their athletic director, because that's the role in which you hold right now. What kind of impact do you want to be able to have on Walsh as you sit in this seat?
That's a great question. Walsh has been, and this is scary to say, but Walsh has literally been a part of my entire adult life. So I love everything about this university, and I don't think I would be as excited to be in this seat if I didn't feel that way. So I want to make sure that every student athlete graduates here with a purpose, and that when they look back on their 4 years, their student athlete experience was something that they have no regrets about. So whether or not I do that by just building casual relationship with them in the gym or in the hallway, that's great. Whether I do that by being their coach or whether I do that by being a mentor to them, that's just my hope for every student here.
Well, I think that's perfect. I knew you'd handle it like a champ, as you always do, Christina. Well, we appreciate your time today. Christina Paone, the Interim Athletic Director at Walsh University. Best of luck with the golf season. We'll be seeing you in a few weeks as we get ready for the G-MAC Championships down in Kentucky. But Christina, thanks again for your time. Best of luck, and we'll be talking to you soon, I'm sure.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Wanna hear you go.